Have you ever felt the cold sting of betrayal? The kind that turns your world upside down? I did. The day I discovered the infidelity that entwined my closest kin in deceit's embrace. My brother-in-law and wife are both traitors. My life, once a portrait of marital bliss with Mary, my high school sweetheart, turned into a canvas of heartache and retribution. From the innocent days of youthful love to the harrowing moment of betrayal in a Connecticut hotel. This is my story. Enjoy watching it. Hello, Mike. I'm Chris Harrington, Jenny Palmer's brother-in-law. Is Colleen available? Mike disconnected the phone for my wife, so I didn't hear the click. Mary's constant ranting and hammering on my locked home office door. I waited 2 minutes before dialing Mike and Colleen's house phone. Listen, punk, if you call this number again, I will report you to the police. Do you understand? I do, Mike. I understand perfectly. However, you must comprehend 2 things. I do not care if you call the cops. And more significantly, I'm going to talk to your wife, and you can't do anything to stop me. Have a nice night. Asshole. Despite the constant beating on the door, I felt satisfied hanging up on him this time. I leaned back in my office chair, closed my eyes, and attempted to make the final critical choice of a long roller coaster day. Should I call my sister-in-law's husband? I asked myself. I met my wife, Mary, in high school. I was a junior, sitting in the bleachers with my friends, waiting for the commencement of a Friday night football game. An equally big group of sophomore females sat in front of us. As the game proceeded, we took turns going to the concession stand. It was my turn to go. I discovered that a gorgeous blonde named Mary had joined me. We brought hot dogs, French fries, and sodas back, and Mary and I ended up sitting together. She was pretty smart and had a nice sense of humor. And best of all, she had no boyfriend. During the middle of the third quarter, someone exclaimed, "Are we going to McDonald's after the game?" The girls and guys in our group were nearly unanimous in their decision to continue having fun at the adjacent McDonald's franchise. Deciding to take a gamble, I turned to Mary and said, "I'd rather have pizza than greasy fries. Would you like to visit Tony's Pizza?" I was ecstatic when she agreed. Mary and I dated on weekends for a few weeks and appeared to enjoy each other's company. We decided to go steady after 2 months of dating, and things only got better. Mary was my junior prom date, and I felt like I was walking on clouds as I accompanied the most gorgeous girl in our school to the dance. I was in heaven until I wasn't. 2 weeks later, on the Monday before the senior prom, I jogged to the tennis courts for team practice. I was jogging beside my neighbor, Julie Burke. Julie was on the girls' team. I was perplexed when Julie said, "I think you're a really nice guy, Julie. We have known each other our entire lives." I said, "Why are you telling me now?" She punched my shoulder as we raced, saying, "It's great that you're letting Mary go to the senior prom with Jimmy Bay. Otherwise, he would never have had the opportunity to travel because he is so quiet and nerdy. Jimmy Bay was a kind person, but he was shy, nerdy, and probably on the spectrum. He was Mary's neighbor, and she constantly kept an eye out for him." I wasn't surprised when Mary consented to go to the prom, but I was disappointed that she didn't inform me. But on Friday afternoon, 6 other people praised me for my maturity. They felt it was fantastic that my steady girlfriend would be taken to the prom by her friend and neighbor. Truthfully, I did not feel mature. I was irritated that Mary didn't have the nerve to notify me about the senior prom. I figured she'd come clean on our usual Friday night rendezvous. She had no choice at the last minute on Friday afternoon. I texted her to cancel. I was inundated with texts and voicemails asking me to call her. After a dozen chimes on my phone, I eventually texted Mary. "I have known about your prom date since Monday. At least 10 individuals told me it's a shame you weren't one of them. I'm looking for a girlfriend I can trust. That is not you." I turned off my phone, and Salt Mary and I did not reconnect until the start of the following school year. It was Friday afternoon, and I was walking to my car in the student parking lot. Mary was sitting on the hood of my car when I approached. "Will you allow an old girlfriend to buy you ice cream at Dairy Queen?" she wanted to know. That was the beginning. We remained exclusive for the next 2 years. We had a long-distance romance throughout my sophomore year while I was attending college in New York City. I was able to visit home frequently and was happy to exchange virginity on a March Saturday night. Mary and I began dating shortly after her 18th birthday and continued until the next year, when she left for college. 2 weeks into her freshman year, I got a Dear John email. She seemed to be having too much fun in college and didn't want to be stuck with a full-time boyfriend. I never called or wrote. I was popular. I excelled academically and competed in Division III tennis. I replaced Mary with a regular stream of girls beginning the next night. I did not see Mary again until 2 years after she graduated from college. I was working as a staff engineer for a local defense firm and went out with some co-workers. After a difficult week, I unexpectedly ran into her at the bar. We talked for a few minutes before returning to our own groups of friends. I'll admit that I kept an eye on her for the next hour, unsure whether I should follow her to the parking lot when her group dispersed. I laughed when Mary's pals left. She approached the bar, perched on a stool, and ordered a drink. When she was served, she swiveled her chair to face me and stared at the table. I watched her with a foolish grin as a slew of guys approached her, only to be promptly turned down. I only excused myself from my buddies after she looked me in the eye and held up 2 fingers. I had to wait for Mary to tell another guy to get lost before I could stand next to her. I asked. Mary grinned and replied, "Yep. If you had let 2 more guys ask me out, I would have accepted his invitation." Mary and I dated for over 6 months before becoming exclusive and moving in together. We married 10 months later and had a joyful and fulfilling life for over 5 years. My day began early. I had a 7:30 a.m. meeting with a longtime customer and friend. We were meeting in the downtown Marriott in New Haven, Connecticut, home of a spectacularly overrated university, beginning with Y. Tony was already seated in the meeting room I had arranged. We talked for a few minutes as I set up my laptop, laid down all of the necessary documentation, and filled a mug with boiling hot black coffee. Tony is a civilian contractor who has been assigned by his employer to work on the U.S. Navy's next-generation submarine propulsion systems. I am a senior mechanical engineer. My company is a defense contractor specializing in marine mechanics. Over the previous few years, we had successfully collaborated on 3 modest but significant contracts. For whatever reason, we were all receiving opposition from our direct supervisors regarding our present negotiations. We were told that we had one more chance to resolve the 7 crucial issues before others from our respective companies took over the negotiations. Tony and I worked straight through lunch before taking a deep breath at 2:15 p.m. "Do you believe your company will accept it this time?" I shrugged and told him honestly that I don't understand why our last 2 bids were rejected. Tony wondered. "You and I have become closer over the last few years. Do you believe it could be a test to see whether we are too close?" I grinned and confessed that I had thought the same thing before stretching and shrugging again. "What about a drink?" Tony asked. I put up my notepad and stated, "I have over 30 pages of notes to figure out. A drink won't make things any easier. I'm going to hang out and transcribe the relevant resolutions to my laptop. I'll email you a memo of understanding by 9 a.m. tomorrow a.m. If there are any misunderstandings, let's call immediately. I need to submit my report before noon tomorrow." "That sounds great." Tony spoke as he began to pack away his computer. I took Tony into the hotel lobby, and after he departed, I went to the gift shop and purchased a Diet Coke before going to the conference room as soon as I came in. I felt like the walls were closing in on me, so I decided to move locations. I packed my luggage and moved to a quiet nook of the hotel foyer. I checked in with the office and discovered that some minor issues had arisen during the course of the morning. After texting my wife and suggesting she enjoyed dinner without me, I sat down in the comfortable lobby chair and went to work. The change in location was beneficial, and I was able to complete a significant amount of work over the next few hours. I was so engaged that I was shocked when her laugh captured my attention. I looked up and saw Jenny, my sister-in-law, strolling across the hotel lobby in a typical little black dress and stunning heels. She was heading directly toward the check-in area. If that wasn't bizarre enough, her arm was wrapped around the arm of a tall, attractive man. The man was not Jenny's husband, Scott. Without thinking, I used my phone's camera app and captured numerous photos of the pair as they checked in. One image made me steam as the man's hand lowered and squeezed her buttocks. I snapped another set of photos as they walked to the elevator, followed by a final set. As they boarded the elevator, they kissed. As the elevator door closed, I swiftly hurried over and noticed that the indicator light indicated that they had gotten out on the 9th floor. I was angry and perplexed. I adore Jenny, and her husband is my best friend. I'll admit it, I was dazed when I sat back in my seat. Between the day's strenuous negotiations and the surprise of finding Jenny with another man, my brain was fried. I didn't notice the man sitting in the chair beside me until he extended his open hand. He said, "Hello, my name is James, and I am the general manager of the Marriott." As we shook hands, I responded, "Hello, James. I'm Christopher Harrington. I rented conference room L122 today." James nodded in understanding before asking, "I observed you photographing the couple that had just checked in. Do you know them?" After a moment, I responded, "I know the woman. Can I assume you were startled to see her with her gentleman friend?" "I was quite startled," I informed James. "Mr. Harrington, can I be blunt?" After I nodded, he went on to say, "I'm worried there will be trouble if you stay here. I've never been into the kind of difficulty you're describing. I have never come close. There is sure to be a confrontation, but I'll go before we disturb your visitors." James gazed around the lobby. It was fairly quiet, and no one seemed to notice us. He handed me a folded sheet of paper, and I folded it to reveal a man's name and address. James inquired, "Do you think there will be even less of a confrontation now that you have that information?" I extended my hand, and as we shook, I said, "I can almost guarantee it." I returned to work and accomplished a surprising lot, despite the fact that I peered up at the elevator bank every few seconds. It was approximately 3 hours later when Jenny and her partner got out of the elevator. My luggage was packed, and I was on my feet approaching them before they could take 2 steps into the lobby. As I approached the pair, I held my cell phone to my face and took pictures. Jenny seemed perplexed at first, but when I lowered the camera, her jaw dropped open and she got pale. "I give you a kiss, as I always do, but I don't want to taste your boyfriend on your lips." "Chris, what the hell are you doing here? I am here for meetings. Why are you here?" I could see Jenny trying to calm herself down. She paused and said, "Chris, I'd like you to meet my charm. We work together. We're here to look into meeting rooms for an upcoming event that our agency is holding." I gazed at Mike as he extended his hand toward me. "Nice to meet you, Chris." I ignored his hand and inquired, "Mike, is it? May I ask you a question?" Mike and Jenny exchanged tense looks before I asked, "Do you think Jenny looks better dressed in these sexy, hip-hugging jeans, skin-tight blouse, and boots?" I waved my hand to indicate Jenny's present outfit, a gorgeous black dress. "When you visited the 8th floor to view meeting rooms, I gazed down at Mike's left hand 3 hours ago, before they had regained consciousness." "Mike, you have a nice wedding band. At that point, I regard you as a lying, cheating pile of trash, just like my lovely sister-in-law." Mike lost his composure and hissed. He said, "Listen, hole, you don't know what's going on. Just keep your mouth shut, and I will not kick your buttocks. I'm sorry to tell you, Mike, but my sister-in-law's affair with a useless hole like you is my business." I carefully put both arms behind my back and kicked my buttocks. "I will offer you a free first shot. You better make it count, because when you take your shot, I'm going to beat the shit out of you, put you in the hospital, and then contact the cops to press charges against you." I shut up and grinned. Mike jerked his head at Ginny and aggressively asked, "Can you handle this?" "A hole? I need to go without waiting for a response." He stormed out of the hotel through the front door. I couldn't help it. Mike approached the hotel's front door. I added, "If I were you, I would warn your wife. I will be calling." Mike paused and slowly turned to face Ginny. He emphasized, "Please take care of this." Ginny turned, placed her hand on my arm, and murmured, "Chris, may we walk into the bar and get a drink?" I was tempted, but ultimately decided against it. "I apologize, Ginny. I wasted several hours waiting for you to finish your sex party." Ginny cringed as I proceeded. "I need to get home, have a drink, and decide how to approach telling Scott and Mike's wife." Jenny clutched my arm and begged, "I only do this while Scott is away. It means nothing. I'm not trying to hurt Scott. Jenny, how long have you known me?" She did not respond, but she looked deeply into my eyes. "I suppose it's been at least a dozen years since I first dated Mary in high school. Does this seem about right?" After allowing the stillness to grow, I angrily told Ginny, "And what would you have concluded after all of that? I will not inform my best friend. His wife is a liar and a cheater." As I turned to go, I caught the eye of James, the hotel's manager. He gave me a grateful nod as I went through the main revolving door. The rush hour traffic was gone. As I began the half-hour drive north on Interstate 91, I was able to set the cruise control to 78 miles per hour and turn up the volume on the country music channel as I drove home. The only irritation during the trip was my cell phone's incessant dings and ringing. My wife appears to have been trying to contact me urgently. I drove into our garage and closed the door behind me. After getting out of the car, I heard my wife, Mary. She was standing in the open doorway that connects our garage to the condo's kitchen. "Where the hell have you been?" she wanted to know. I slid past her and proceeded into the kitchen. After tossing my work supplies on the counter, I spotted Mary's cell phone laying on the kitchen table next to a half-full glass of wine. I took her phone, pressed the keyboard to enter her password, and opened her text messages. I could see that the SMS message I sent several hours earlier had been read. So I asked, "Do you know where I've been? You have read the message. That's not what I intended. You are already aware of this." As I proceeded to the den to pour a couple of fingers of bourbon, I asked over my shoulder, "Then tell me what you mean." When I returned to the kitchen, Mary was seated at the table. She said, "What did you do to upset Jenny?" As far as I know, I have not done anything to bother Jenny. Ginny, on the other hand, has deeply upset me. I sat across from Mary and watched her assemble her thoughts. "Did you know Jenny was cheating on Scott?" My blunt inquiry took her by surprise. She said it happened only once. "Well, that is a lie," I told Mary. "Jenny informed me that she only cheats while Scott is on the road." After a brief break, I resumed. "I saw that you did not answer my inquiry. Did you know your sister cheated on Scott?" Mary groaned, took a sip of wine, and remarked to Chris, "This is between Scott and Ginny." I grinned and informed Mary, "That is the first thing you have said that I agree with. It's between Scott and Jenny. My issue is that Scott is unaware that there is a situation that requires immediate attention." "Damn that! It is none of your concern," Mary erupted. "I want you to keep your mouth closed." I leaned forward and put my elbows on the kitchen table, having folded the fingers of both hands together in prayer. I said, "You know me, Mary. You know me better than anyone else." Mary had expected more and was surprised when I stood up and hurried quickly to the kitchen archway. I paused for a moment before turning. "I asked you twice if you had heard about Ginny cheating, and you refused to respond. I will ask again. How long have you known? Do you know Ginny? She has always been a touch crazy." 043 was my immediate answer. What the hell does that mean? It simply means you refuse to answer a question that I believe is crucial to our marriage. "What Ginny does when Scott is abroad has no influence on our marriage," Mary stated confidently. "Okay, let's see." I leaned against the arch and counted all of my fingers. "First off, my connection with your sister will never be the same. I now know she is a liar. That includes every holiday that we celebrate with your family. I will be reminded of your sister's deceit. Second, you've given me every piece of evidence that you were aware of her terrible actions, and I'm left wondering if you approve. That is not fair, Chris. Third, while I don't travel as often as Scott, I'm taking one vacation every month for the first time in our relationship. I have to worry about whether you cheated on me." Mary's eyes grew large and she exploded. "How can you accuse me of cheating?" I instantly jumped in and answered with the same intensity. "I've never accused you of cheating, but your casual attitude toward your sister's misbehavior makes me wonder if you have." I paused and looked at my wife before continuing. "You and I both understand that you cannot prove you have not cheated. I just have trust in you. And right now, that trust is seriously undermined." I turned and strolled down the hall to my home office after conducting an internet search on my charm, which revealed that he was married and had both calls to his house intercepted. I resolved to undertake the last dreaded task. I texted my brother-in-law, Scott. "You're returning home on Friday, am I correct?" It took him 10 minutes to answer. "Yep." "I land at 2:30 p.m., meet me at the pit stop. I'll be there at 4. "Is this related to Jenny's panicked phone call?" "Want to know if we've talked?" Scott wanted to know. My phone rang while I was trying to decide how to reply. I responded, "Hello, Scott." I wasn't trying to hide my statements from Mary when I swiveled my chair to face the wall, but I also wasn't going to make it easy for her to hear them through the closed and locked door. "What is going on, Chris? Scott, this is about as terrible as it gets. Are you sure you want to do this by phone?" After a brief pause, Scott inquired, "Is she cheating on me?" I said yes. The stillness lasted several minutes, punctuated by an occasional sob-y. "I will see you in the pit," he said. The call was terminated instantly. I was going to text Scott and tell him I was willing to talk whenever he wanted, but I ultimately chose to leave my pal alone. I felt certain that he knew I had his back and was accessible whenever he needed me. Mary had quieted down while I was speaking with Scott. I am sure she was trying to listen. After hanging up, I heard her say, "Please come to the kitchen," through the closed door. "We need to talk." I was about to walk to our guest bedroom, but instead decided to finish the bourbon at the kitchen table after settling onto a kitchen chair across from Mary. I took a good swallow of Knob Creek and enjoyed the mild burn in my throat. I looked across at my wife and saw the wheels feverishly churning in her head, preparing for her next attack. My brain had died, I didn't have much fight left in me, and I knew the final ounce of alcohol wouldn't help. I was waiting for Mary to start when my phone vibrated in my pocket. "Jesus!" I exploded. "When will the day end? I doubt the phone is out." I looked at the screen and saw a number I didn't recognize, which contributed to my already high frustration. I answered the phone with an assertive hello. A female replied, "I'm sorry for calling so late. My name is Colleen." Charmed. Someone from this number contacted my home twice. Earlier this evening, the calls disturbed my husband greatly, and I believe the caller was attempting to reach me with a sigh. "Colleen, my name is Chris Harrington. I called earlier and tried to communicate with you in a melancholy tone." Colleen said, "I'm guessing you're calling to tell me that my husband is cheating with your wife." I informed her that he was cheating with my sister-in-law. Her name is Jennifer Palmer, and I believe they work together. There was a long delay before she replied. "This is the third time I have received a similar call, and it will be the last. How does a man do this to his wife and 4 children?" I knew the question was rhetorical, so I volunteered. "I have photos of them checking in at the downtown New Haven Marriott, kissing in the elevator as the door closed and returning to the lobby." Jenny's outfit had changed nearly 3 hours after their date. The rest of the call was spent exchanging email addresses and promising to send the images in the morning. After hanging up, Mary stated, "Jenny told me you had an open marriage. That is a falsehood. His wife and 4 children feel they are in a monogamous marriage with a loving household." Mary held her palms up to her face, shocked. I continued, "Apparently this is the 3rd time she has found him cheating. She is planning to divorce him." Mary was surprised as she looked at me. I swirled the remainder of my bourbon around in the glass before swallowing the last sip. After rinsing the glass in the sink, I went up to her bedroom and lay in bed, thinking about all that had happened to my extended family in the previous few hours. I came to the realization that I was not to blame for all of the grief and damage. As usual, my alarm went off at 5 a.m. Instead of starting the day working out in our basement gym, I immediately bathed, dressed, and went to work. I was not attempting to get away from Mary. I needed to get into the office, complete the memo of understanding, and send it to Tony. Thursday was a busy day. Tony and I had to talk on the phone for 45 minutes to get the language absolutely right on a handful of topics, but I was easily able to deliver the full agreement to my boss before the noon deadline. I spent the afternoon catching up on emails from the previous day before heading home around 5 p.m., my normal quitting time. I had been wondering what the evening would bring, so I was only half shocked when I came onto our street and saw Jenny's and her parents' cars parked in front of our house. It is going to be a very long night. I grimaced as I pushed the button to open the garage door. "What the hell were you saying to Scott?" Jenny fired the opening salvo as I closed the door behind me, looking at my terrified wife. I claimed I was going to change. "I will be back in a few minutes. But I warn you, if your family disrespects me in my home, I will physically toss them out the front door. This includes you, Mary." I didn't wait for a response before rushing down the hall to her bedroom. After debating the coward's way out and climbing out the bedroom window, I decided to confront Mary and her family. It was difficult to pass by my open bottle of bourbon, but I figured it was best to keep a clear head. My second thought was, screw it, so I returned to the bar. 1 inch did not seem to be enough, and 2 inches was too much for polite conversation, so I settled on 1.5 inches of my favorite amber liquid. When I walked back into the kitchen, everyone was staring at me. Everyone was seated at the table. There was a vacant seat between Mary and her father, Steve. Instead of sitting, I leaned against the kitchen counter, observed the gathering, and wet my lips with my drink. I liked my in-laws. They were decent, reliable folks. Steve, my father-in-law, was someone I admired. He was direct and honest. And you were always aware of his feelings toward you. If you stayed on his good side, you could not have a better buddy in the world. If, on the other hand, you came across him, I was convinced that he could make your life miserable. Steve saw Scott and me as pals. My mother-in-law considered herself a wheeler dealer and businesswoman extraordinaire. She owned and operated a well-known local real estate franchise that had an excellent reputation. While Betty supervised the day-to-day operations, everyone knew Steve was the driving force behind the company's success. Wouldn't it be more pleasant to sit here? Mary patted the chair beside her. I have been sitting all day. I'm fine where I am. Jenny had more emotional control. She questioned, What did you tell Scott? I paused for a second before responding. I texted him and asked to meet when he arrived home tomorrow. I told him it was urgent. After gathering my thoughts, I continued. Scott called and asked what was wrong. After confirming that he wanted to talk on the phone, I informed him that you were cheating on him. He cried for a few minutes before confirming his plans to meet with me. I was astonished by how upset the family appeared to be. Mary was crying and said, I beg you to mind your own business. I was curious if her statement was for her family's advantage. I responded, telling you that was my business. My mother-in-law chimed in, saying, That is debatable. Jenny inquired before I could respond, Do you plan to meet Scott tomorrow? I am. What are you planning to tell him, she wanted to know. I responded, I don't have anything else to tell him. I saw in the photos I took and informed him that you were with Mike for about 3 hours. I supplied him with Mike's name and address, as well as his wife's contact information. I'm guessing I'll be a support and a shoulder to weep on. How about me, Chris? Jenny wanted to know. Don't I also deserve support? I truly smiled as I looked around the table. Jenny, it appears that you are well supported. I'll go with Scott on this one. How do you ensure Scott does not cheat on Jenny while he travels? Betty observed that married men often stray when they are away from home. The girl's mother. However, I cannot fathom Scott cheating. If I'm honest, I have no idea how he behaves when he's away. Until yesterday, I never suspected Jenny was a cheater, or maybe my wife is cheating on me. The table exploded with, How dare you? And that is uncalled for. Mary was definitely stunned by my statement, so I jumped in and proceeded. At least I was honest with Mary last night. Her casual and dismissive attitude toward Jenny's adultery makes me apprehensive. Steve, the girl's father, informed me that Mary has never cheated on you. I can't believe you think so negatively of her. I realized I needed to be careful with my next few words. I did not want to turn Steve against me. I purposefully turned down the intensity and severity of my voice, looked Steve in the eye, and challenged them. Prove it. After a few moments of silence, I resumed. That's it, Steve. You cannot establish that Mary did not cheat on me. I raised my hand when the protest began. All I have is 6 years of complete trust in Mary. Last night I told her that my trust in her had been shattered. That is not fair, Chris. I got in before Mary had finished. I asked you 3 times last night if you knew Ginny had cheated on Scott. You refused to answer my query. Instead, you changed the topic. You did not lie, but you were dishonest. Yes. I looked at Mary, who admitted. I knew about Jenny's affairs. I have not backed her, but I did not intend to make a mess like this. She waved her hands to indicate our current concerns. I had hoped that her affairs would run their course without Scott finding out. I nodded. However, I was deeply unhappy that Mary concealed her sister's infidelity. I could understand why she was protecting her sister. Do you remember our conversation about being exclusive a few weeks before you proposed to me? Mary inquired as I nodded. She looked me firmly in the eyes and stated, I promise I haven't had a romantic or intimate relationship since our conversation. In fact, I have not been with another man since we began dating after college. Call me naive, but I saw the angel I married 5 years ago when she delivered those words. I love you and believe in you, I told my bride. Her family was courteous enough to wait a few moments before we resumed our talk. Steve seemed particularly pleased with the course of events. Then he inquired, What are you going to do with Scott? I'm just going to support my best friend. Just as each of you will support Jenny, Scott deserves my support, and I will offer it to him. The next 6 weeks were a struggle. Scott relocated from his house to a nearby apartment. He promptly filed for an official separation from Jenny, but did not file for divorce. I had supper with Scott every Wednesday, although Mary followed the same schedule as her sister. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was eating lunch with a couple of co-workers at Clyde's barbecue and bar. We were seated at a table for 4 when a man pulled out an empty chair and sat across from me. "Hey, hey, hey! I bet you've forgotten about me." It took a few beats before I was able to identify the face. "Hello, Michael. I heard Colleen had dumped you. How does it feel to be an absent father?" He snarled and replied, "Screw you, dickhead." "It is your fault." I noticed my friends Carl and Joe were moderately amused. I returned my focus to Mick and responded, "Yeah, your divorce is my fault." Mike grinned and confessed, "I guess that was also partly my fault. But with so many married women around, it's impossible for me to be faithful." When Mike continued, I became increasingly concerned about his response. It appears that I am a sex addict, and my kink is a married woman. I enjoy hooking them on my flesh and sharing it with my friends. Mike bumped Carl to the right. That is what I did with Jenny, his sister-in-law, after her husband left town. I transformed her into my own personal sex doll, which I shared and exchanged with my pals. He winked and informed me she was really popular, and we used her for more than a year. She enjoyed every moment with me and my companions. I was about to ditch her when I ran into her and her attractive younger sister at a happy hour. His smirk left no doubt about the rest of the exchange, which involved reaching inside his back pocket. He brought out an envelope and threw it on the table next to my plate. It was the kind of envelope that contained photographs. Mike's smirk explained everything I needed to know about the material. I'll admit that my heart was shattered into 1,000 pieces, but I'd be damned if I let the world see me falter. I scooped up the envelope and shoved it into my sports coat pocket, attempting to agitate me. Mike remarked, "Aren't you going to show your friends? I'll bet they enjoy seeing photographs and videos of your wife and her sister screwing my guys. I've been turning her out for more than 5 months. As crazy and horny as Jenny is, your wife is 10 times wilder, laughing." Mike continued, "I have a video of her on her knees, pleading for us to hit her. She enjoys being used as a sex doll." He laughed again. "What's the matter, a-hole? Do you have nothing to say?" I was grating my teeth but had to answer. I said, "You must be the stupidest scumbag on the planet." When I told him, his smirk remained ear to ear. When I delivered Jenny's husband, Scott, those photos, he announced that he was going to file for divorce. "Since you are Jenny's direct supervisor, how long do you think it will take to sue you or your company? You will be out of work in a week." It was hard, but I started giggling. The moron realized he had underestimated me and was planning his next move. I asked, "Did you know I grew up in this town? Why should I care where you grew up? The a-hole was in for a world of pain, but I would take my time. I know all of the town's movers and shakers." Mike didn't seem impressed, so I proceeded. "I also know some of the worst people. I would like to propose that you depart town while your legs are still functioning. Screw you. I am not terrified of you. I have witnesses who say you threatened me." He indicated Carl and Joe. They both laughed, and Joe admitted he was indeed an idiot. "You are getting divorced and losing your children. You are going to be dismissed from your job, while repaying alimony and child support. Best of all, I would encourage you to start glancing over your shoulder shortly. Someday you will find yourself in a world of pain." Mike smugly shoved his chair back, stood up, and muttered, "Screw you, hole. You're nothing but a coke with a scumsucker for a spouse." My thoughts were racing as Mike went away. Later, back in my office, I examined the photographs and confirmed the most disgusting details imaginable for a happily married man. There were some explicit photos of Mary with 6 different males. She was surrounded by 3 men and 1 woman. Jenny was shown in a second set of photos performing many of the same acts. The video was even worse, crushing my spirit. Mary and Jenny enjoy being the center of a series of bizarre orgies, cries of "screw me harder," or words that I will never forget. After gathering my thoughts and putting aside my enormous sadness and fury, I called Scott and invited him to join me for supper. After another 15 minutes of looking into space, I invited another individual to join Scott and me. I had tears in my eyes as I sat at my desk, outlining my ideas. I knew I'd be unable to act normally with Mary. I needed to get away. I traveled for my company virtually every month. Half of my excursions were scheduled in advance. The other excursions were urgent. and at the last minute, I texted Mary. Whitaker's account is in peril. I am on my way to the airport. Scott and I ate a peaceful supper that night after ordering drinks. I handed him the small stack of photos that Mike had given me earlier that day. Scott was equally devastated for himself and for me. We decided that divorce was the only viable choice for us, and we contemplated suing the insurance company that employed Ginny and Mike. Finally, we decided to accept the counsel of our divorce attorney. We'd been sitting at our table for more than an hour. When I saw Sal Morello enter the bar, he searched the room, noticed me, and went our way. He paused to shake hands and say a few things to people at other tables. Sal is older than Scott and me. His daughter, Trish, attended our school system 1 year after me. Sal had a large car salvage yard just outside town. 15 years ago, when I was 16, I was practicing my serve on the high school tennis courts. Trish waved to me one summer day as she rode her bike by the courts. A few minutes later, as I was retrieving the dispersed balls on the court, I looked up and saw 5 classmates shoving Trish behind the baseball field bleachers, approximately 100 yards away. I had a pretty clear notion of what the holes were thinking, and Trish was not that type of gal. I ran from the courts and ended up under the bleachers. A brief few seconds later, Trish's t-shirt had been yanked off. She was screaming, crying, and attempting to protect herself as the shitheads tugged on her shorts. Stan Malloy turned barely in time for the rim of my racket to hit his nose. It burst. Blood poured everywhere, and Stan let out a blood-curdling scream as he fell to the ground. My backhand landed squarely on Joey Burns's cheek, knocking him out. I can't recall much after that. The 3 remaining holes tackled me and kicked the living shit out of me while I was down. After the final few kicks, they were afraid and fled. Trish continued to weep as I attempted to regain my bearings. We left Trish's bike in the field, and she assisted me to my car. I was scarcely able to drive, but I eventually arrived in front of her house. My car has not fully stopped before. Trish hopped out of the front seat and rushed, crying, into her house. I had to exit the vehicle and circle it to close the door. Trish left the door open while I closed it. I heard a crash and turned toward the house. A massive bull of a man was charging for me. His visage appeared ready to kill. When he got close, he observed the damage to my face and my hunched-over posture. "You are Harrington's kid," he growled at me. I could scarcely nod. I informed him, "Mr. Morello, I think I need an ambulance." I leaned against the automobile, lowering myself slowly and painfully to the ground. Mr. Morello turned and roared towards the house. "Call an ambulance! Do it now!" Mr. Morello kneeled next to me, held my chin in his palm, and moved my head so we could meet eyes. What in the hell happened to my daughter? He wanted to know what holes had pulled her beneath the baseball field bleachers. "Was this you?" he barked. I grumbled and shook my head. I was practicing on the tennis court next to the field. Every syllable was awful. He had fury in his eyes as he said, "What did those holes do to me?" He was unable to complete the phrase. When I arrived, they had taken her shirt off. They were trying to take her pants off. She was still in her bra and shorts. If I hadn't been in so much pain, I'm sure his frigid glare would have terrified me. "I want to know their names. Stan Malloy and Joey Burns will be at the hospital when I arrive." I smashed their faces with my racket. I informed him of the names of the other 3 shitheads as an ambulance and a police car approached my car. Mr. Morello leaned in so that we were nose to nose. I could smell garlic on his breath. He continued in a voice just above a whisper, "If you ever need a favor, come see Sal Morello." Sal sat at our table without being introduced. I handed him the photo envelope and waited a moment while he looked through it. When he looked up at me, I added, "There is a man named Michael Schmidt. He's a top employee at Jimmy Sullivan's insurance office. His hobby is to capture married women for his own enjoyment and then share them with his pals. The photos I showed you featured him and his group with my wife and my brother-in-law's wife." Sal nodded, indicating his understanding as I continued. "I'm hoping that someday he won't be as attractive. His walk will be much less athletic, and he will have difficulty achieving an erection." The 3 of us sat quietly for a few minutes until Sal said his sole words. "You'll both be single shortly. It could be wise to join a gym. You can decide to work directly from the gym every night. You can work out together for a few hours and then go out for supper." Before ending, he took a close look at our perplexed expressions. Do you idiots believe you can have airtight alibis every night? When he realized that, we understood what he was saying. He rolled his eyes, nodded at me, stood up, and strolled slowly out of the pub. I did not go home, as I had informed Mary. The first was outside of town. Instead, I stayed at a neighboring Marriott for the night. I was able to speak directly with my supervisor and give him a shortened version of my problems. He agreed to let me work remotely and notify my team that I would be going the following week via email. The uncomfortable recliner in the corner of the motel room called to me. I fell into the chair, closed my eyes, and thought about the preceding weeks. Mary was obviously unable to reveal her romance with Mike and his buddies because of the hard position I had taken with her sister. She knew for certain that I would divorce her. Mary was correct. But, as I considered the divorce equation, I believe I would have been fair if she had been honest and open. Instead, Mary kept lying to me. I had to find out about her deceit in front of my friends and co-workers. I can't imagine anything more demeaning and embarrassing than sitting in front of your wife's pimp and realizing she enjoys orgies. She had been quite unjust to me, and as a result, our divorce would not have been fair. Instead, I realized I needed to crush Mary. I pledged to myself that I would ruin my wife, love, and best friend in an equally brutal manner. Mary's divorce would not be amicable. I struggled out of the recliner, strolled to the hotel room's corner office desk, and made my plans. It took until about 1:30 a.m. to plan my pre-divorce approach for my dishonest, unfaithful wife. If my strategy failed, she would be devastated. On the other hand, if everything went as planned, she'd end up shattered and in a heap on the curb. The next morning, I was able to set up an appointment with a divorce attorney for the following day. Despite the attorney's advice, I did not proceed to separate our finances. This would have to wait. I moved into an extended-stay motel and established a remote office. I ignored Mary's calls and texts until Friday. At that moment, I just texted her that I would be out for the weekend. Her reaction was quite emotional, and she called all weekend pleading with me to call her back. I was able to buy everything I needed to complete my plan. After finishing my checklist, I headed to the mountains for a lengthy hike on Sunday. When I returned to the hotel, I checked my phone and saw texts and calls from Mary, all of her family members plus a few co-workers. Mary was apparently very upset that I had gone missing, and she was attempting to locate me on Monday and Tuesday. I worked from a motel room. I tried to wrap up all loose ends because I would be out of the office the next day. Wednesday was the day I checked out of the motel after breakfast and returned home. On the way, I checked Mary's employer's parking lot to ensure her car was at work. I also placed a GPS gadget below her seat. It took a few hours to set up the necessary equipment and props at home, but I was done by 2 p.m. I kindled a fire in the living room fireplace. Mary and I used to love a nice fire on a Saturday night. We'd drink wine, speak, and snuggle while watching the flames jump around the fireplace. However, today was not a frigid February day. It was September, and the temperature outside was 84 degrees in the early afternoon. I waited until 3 p.m. and texted. Mary just got home. My phone rang quickly. I let Mary's phone go to voicemail, but she didn't leave any messages. Instead, she sent me a message. I kept an eye on my laptop's GPS indication. I expected Mary to leave work right away, but she didn't. She was about to show me the fire, and at 5:05 p.m., I was still adding logs to the top of the pile. When the GPS indicated that Mary had begun her journey home, the temperature in the living area was easily more than 100 degrees. Perfect. I believed my heart had hardened. I clenched my teeth as I waited for her to come home. Mary waited 3 minutes after opening the garage door to enter the kitchen. I heard her drop her briefcase beside the entrance and felt her presence as she stood in the living room entryway. She stepped in and found me sitting on the couch watching the fire. A cheese and cracker dish and a bottle of wine sat on the table in front of the couch. I was holding a single glass of wine. A second glass was at the other end of the table, reserved for Mary. "What the hell are you doing?" Mary commented. "The heat is overwhelming," as I turned away from the fire to gaze at her. I asked, "What the hell do I look like doing?" I had planned a lovely welcome for my wife. I observed 2 droplets of sweat running down her forehead and cheek. A romantic. The words stopped in her throat, and she did not complete the sentence. Instead, she moved a few steps closer to the fire, bent down, and picked up a half-burned item from the stone. She held it up and carefully examined it before taking a step back and glancing at the top level of the bookcase. I worried she'd damage her back. She moved so rapidly to face me. Her eyes widened with dread as she showed me the scorching front cover of a book. It was the only part of the book that survived the fire. Mary did not appear to be in any condition to speak, so I calmly informed her that we didn't have any kindling to start the fire. So I used a few of those old books. I nodded toward the empty space on the top shelf where Mary maintained a full row of books. I just used around 4 or 5. We have plenty more to ignite the next fire. While we were conversing, I got up from the couch and retrieved Mary's glass of wine, which I held out to her. I watched her expression change from confusion to fury. Mary's father presented her with a gift on her birthday. The gift was the previous year's most popular children's book. On the first blank page, her father wrote Mary a heartfelt love letter outlining his aspirations and dreams for his daughter. Her father gave her the same birthday present every year. She had 28 novels each as a reminder of her father's affection. I tightened my jaw when I saw Mary scream and begin to swing. I'm not sure if she meant to slap or strike me when her hand touched my face. It ached like hell. Her palm smashed into my left eye, and her fingernails punctured the skin on my cheek. The contents of the 2 glasses of wine stained the front of my shirt and slacks. Her expression changed again, and as she began to cry, I could see complete confusion without saying anything. She turned and dashed up the stairs to our second-story bedroom. I heard the door slam behind her. Despite the fact that I knew my marriage was over, I smiled. My strategy had worked well. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, I noticed my eye was red and swelling. Mary's nails had broken the skin, and a small amount of blood streamed down my cheek. Let's get this over with, I murmured to myself as I took my cell phone from my pocket and dialed 911. What is your emergency? I heard it from the other end. My name is Chris Harrington, and I require police assistance with a domestic issue. My wife brutally assaulted me after I gave the operator my address. She inquired, Mr. Harrington, are you in a safe place? I am. My wife has locked herself inside our bedroom. I'll be sitting on the front porch until the police arrive. Do you need medical attention? The dispatcher asked. No, I did not sustain serious injuries. According to police policy, the dispatcher remained on the line until the first police car arrived. I was aware that my call was being recorded, and I took great care in responding to her queries. A second patrol car arrived almost immediately after the first one had stopped at the curb. 3 police officers walked over the lawn together. Thank you for coming, officers. What's happening? The grizzled old veteran inquired. I turned my head so they could clearly observe the injury on my left side. My wife, Mary, hit me. Why did she hit you? He wanted to know. I wanted to be careful with my response. I informed him that my wife had grown verbally abusive during the last few months. I suppose she is conflicted. She's been concealing an affair that she doesn't believe I know about. In fact, I prepared to serve her with divorce papers. Tonight, when we discuss this with your wife, will we find any damage? I have never touched my wife or any other lady in anger, was my honest response. One of the younger cops inquired, Do you have any guns in your home? I own numerous handguns. They're all kept in a gun safe in my workplace. My wife does not know the combination for the safe. The 2 younger officers entered my residence to speak with Mary. I spoke to the third. Do you want to watch a video of my wife slapping me? He squinted, attempting to make sense of my sentence. It took a few beats before he asked, Do you have proof of the assault? I have not looked at it. I believe I have proof. As I finished, I motioned for him to follow me. My laptop was on the kitchen countertop. I needed to boot up the computer and locate the cloud-based storage account. I opened the folder, backed up the video for 30 minutes, and discovered the beginning of our confrontation. I hit play and walked back to allow the police officer to observe the action clearly. He waited until Mary exited the room and ran upstairs. He then wanted to view it again. After the second time, he pressed the communication device on his shoulder and stated, Arrest Mrs. Harrington. Almost immediately, I heard Mary crying from above, and my heart began to race. I knew the officer had asked me a question, but I needed to hear it again. Are all of your home's rooms under camera surveillance? This was a line of questioning I didn't want to engage in, but I knew I had to respond. Honestly, no. The living room is the only one with a camera. He nodded, understood, and scratched his chin, wondering how long you had the camera in the living room. I shrugged my shoulders and admitted it was a relatively recent addition. Our gazing battle was disrupted when Mary shouted and implored Chris, "What the hell is going on? Please help me!" I was going to react when one of the young officers exclaimed, "Sir, this is a police investigation. Please go immediately." He was speaking to an elderly man standing in the open front door of my home with equal authority. The man explained, "I am an official process server, and I'm here to serve Mrs. Mary Harrington." He marched up to Mary, and all three officers took a step closer in case things got out of hand. The man inquired, "Are you Mary Harrington?" When Mary nodded, he held up an envelope and announced, "Mary Harrington, you were served. In addition to the divorce petition, you are prohibited from approaching Mr. Christopher Harrington, his home or his workplace, because Mary was shackled." He delivered the envelope to the cop, who was holding Mary's elbow as the process server departed. I turned to Mary. I watched as the panic and perplexity left her face. It was replaced by calmness. She stared at me and asked how I found out. Mike told me. As the two younger cops brought Mary to the back seat of the patrol car, the third officer handed me his business card and requested that I email him a copy of the film. I escorted him to the front door and saw the first car go with Mary. The elder officer had come to a halt about halfway down my front sidewalk. He turned to inquire, "I've seen you at the pit stop before, haven't I?" "Yes, I recognize you, Sergeant. He informed me that 4 years ago I divorced my wife for adultery. I pay alimony, child support, health insurance, and the mortgage on the house where she lives with my children and her nasty boyfriend. Maybe the next time I see you at the pit stop, you'll let me buy you a beer and tell me what the hell happened today." I went to work the next day and was able to be relatively productive, having survived Thursday and Friday. I really grumbled aloud when I returned home on Friday night and discovered my father-in-law waiting on my front step after pulling into the garage. I got out of the car and called, "Steve, come in this way." As he entered, I was pouring in 2 extra-large Knob Creeks. We sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes, gently drinking our drinks, until he revealed that she was also cheating. I just nodded. "Is there hope?" he wanted to know. I took 2 more leisurely swallows before I was calm enough to respond to Steve in a courteous and respectful manner. It wasn't the first time, and it wasn't with just one man. I had another sip, and then I told Steve the whole truth. And it wasn't limited to one individual at a time. He looked at me in surprise, and before he could answer, I said, "I've seen pictures and videos that make me want to throw up." Steve shrank in his seat, turning white. A tear rolled down his cheek. We sat together for a long time. Each of us was absorbed in our own thoughts and recollections. Mary and Jenny did not learn this behavior from their mother or me. His focused glare was just short of terrifying. Everyone knows that several more minutes passed before Steve stood up and circled the table. As I arose, he wrapped a tight bear grip around my shoulder. After letting go, he stumbled to the door like a 90-year-old man. After opening the door, he turned over his shoulder and declared that burning those books was a terrible thing to do. I had totally forgotten about the stunt. I used to initiate the altercation with Mary. I nearly yelled when I said, "Hold on." I left the kitchen and returned within seconds with a little box. I gave it to Steve after opening it. He glanced at me with a shocked expression. I informed him that I knew you treasured those books, and I would never have destroyed them. Then how? He was too shocked to finish his thoughts. I told him I went to the bookshop to get a copy, as is my usual morning routine. I sat at the kitchen table on Saturday morning, scanning our local newspaper on my tablet. I grinned as I read the Hartford Times local section. West Hartford police are investigating a savage assault on a local man as he left a neighborhood bar in the city's Elmwood district. Michael Sharma was attacked in Top's rear parking lot at 10:30. His injuries are severe and necessitate hospitalization. According to an HPD spokesperson, the police have multiple leads and anticipate making an arrest soon. It was a bright, sunny November morning. I observed the red Ford SUV park a few spots away from me, and the driver carefully got out of the vehicle. "Hello, Michael. You look like—" I was in the parking lot in front of Jackson Physical Therapy, sitting on the open tailgate of my Ford F-150 pickup. Mike had an appointment at 10:30 a.m., according to a small bird. I said, "It might be a good idea to get a handicap tag so you can park closer to the building. Like the others, he has knee and foot injuries. Mike also suffered a fractured jaw, which will be wired shut for at least another month." "Has the cat gotten your tongue?" "A hole," I asked with a smirk. I have to give Mike credit. He shuffled toward me with a cane and came to a stop 5 feet away. He was aware that Scott and I had been questioned by the police and eventually cleared, but I believe he knew we were complicit in his beating. Now he was certain that the hatred in his eyes was palatable. I am sure he was picturing gruesome tortures that would take months to accomplish. I felt convinced Mike and I would meet again in the future. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life constantly looking over my shoulder, so I organized this meeting. Mike turned slowly and began his first shuffle. When I stated Mary Marie, Charmit from Milford, Connecticut. As he turned back, I joined Susan from White Plains, New York, and Lori Fitzpatrick from Brockton, Massachusetts. I continued, and the hatred in his eyes faded into confusion. If anything happens to me, such as a plane disaster, drowning while on vacation, or falling down a flight of stairs, I've arranged for my buddies to pay visits to your mother and sisters. I noticed a tiny tremor in his arm when he gripped the cane. My friends will beat their faces just as they did yours. They will harm their legs in the same way that you have. I wanted to make sure Mike was paying attention. My friends will kick their crotches just like they kicked yours. I waited a few moments for him to process the information before I finished. While your mother and sisters are in agony, my pals will convince them that their beating is your fault. I was startled. Mike stared at me for a few moments before giving me a fast nod. I wasn't sure if he was nodding in understanding or declaring a truce. He turned and stumbled toward the door to the building. I'm pleased to inform you that this was my final encounter with Mike Schmidt. I did grant my divorce lawyer the power of attorney required to manage all legal concerns arising from our breakup. We didn't have children. We earned about the same amount of money. Most importantly, I cared only about isolating myself from Mary. I received a call from my shark a few weeks after Mary's service. She informed me that we had achieved an agreement that was nearly identical to the terms we discussed. However, Mary will not sign off until she has had the opportunity to speak with you. I used obscenities and received advice. Simply do it. Sit down and let her discuss it with you. I'll agree to have Mary sign the documents, and you approve everything, so it's official. I'll meet with her for an hour in a conference room at your office after she's signed the paperwork. I heard that it would work before the call ended. 3 days later, I was sitting in a meeting room. June. The paralegal knocked on the door, unlocked it, and informed me that everything was signed off and notarized. She nodded and moved away from the door, leaving Mary standing at the entryway. She had obviously made an effort with her outfit and makeup, but it didn't matter. Even in a sweater and ponytail, Mary looked stunning to me. She went around the table, stooped down, and kissed my cheek before taking a seat across from me. Are you nervous like I am? She wanted to know. My first thought was, what an odd way to start. But I took her questions into consideration. I shrugged, admitting I wasn't nervous. I'm feeling more anxious. I want to get this over with so I can move on with my life. When she told me I was blackmailed, tears streamed down her cheek. Mike was going to post videos of Jenny on the internet. Her father had called me early in the divorce procedure and said the same thing. So I was not shocked. It could have started with blackmail, but I viewed the videos. I've watched you orgasm countless times. And they were real. You asked for more sex. You asked to be screwed harder. You begged every second. There wasn't anything forced down your neck. I got angry for a second and needed to cool down. After a few moments, I resumed. You may have felt forced, but that's no reason to ruin our marriage. Just because you discovered Ginny was cheating on her husband does not imply you should follow suit, Mary erupted. I was perplexed and couldn't see any alternatives. What could I have done? You could have. You should have trusted me. Mary rolled her eyes, which made me upset. I proceeded with Ginny. We would have contacted the police and filed a report. We'll never know if the cops could have gathered enough evidence to do anything. We know his wife and employer would have found out, and we would have felt a teeny bit better. More importantly, we would still be together. Unfortunately, you did not trust me. Truthfully, I'm not sure if you ever did. What type of BS are you talking about? Mary wanted to know. I responded with a query. Do you recall why we split up the first time? Is this the first time? Do you mean during high school? Mary seemed completely perplexed. What has that got to do with anything? In high school, you didn't trust me enough to tell me you wanted to assist your neighbor Jimmy and attend his prom with him. You have got to be kidding me. I was a dumb high school student who was concerned about offending my first serious boyfriend. Were you a dumb college student too? I inquired when she gave me a quizzical look. I continued through Labor Day weekend. Before you entered college, we made love on a raft on Simpson Lake. We agreed to stay faithful and marry after college. Your pledge lasted 11 days. Mary demanded, "Are you telling me that you were completely faithful the first year of college?" I shook my head, ignoring her useless query. "My point is, whether you agree or disagree, I wonder whether you ever trusted me. I don't think any of us would argue that I have every reason not to believe anything you say at this point. You outright lie when you're not lying. You are playing word games and concealing the facts, attempting to steer the discourse." Mary told me. "I haven't seen Mike since the issue began." When I smirked, Mary said, "What?" "Mike had an awful accident. He is unable to perform at his previous level." "What exactly are you talking about?" Mary inquired with an ear-to-ear smile. I responded despite several injuries. Both of his testicles had ruptured. One was surgically removed. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she inquired, "How could you possibly know?" "I know because I paid to have it happen." Her hands were covering her face as she looked across the table at me with wide eyes. "He's a vicious man, Chris. I am terrified for you. I met Mike a few weeks after his injury, and we had a very civil conversation. I'm almost confident I convinced him. Our association must come to an end." Mary's expression shifted from terror to love. I'd seen the expression numerous times throughout the years. "Do you still love me?" she nearly yelled. I laughed in amazement at her scream. Mary was clearly irritated, saying, "You can't tell me that you don't love me." I shrugged and informed her, "You're correct. I can't deny that I adore you. I also cannot say that I love you. What you need to realize is that I am hesitant to devote the time and effort necessary to cultivating the love that remains within me." Mary almost erupted. "Why would you even say that?" "It's simple." I looked into her eyes and told her she wasn't worth it. Mary sank back and shrank in her chair. Tears streamed down her cheek, and I noticed she was breathing through her open lips. I reached inside the folder in front of me and pulled out 3 photos, one by one. I placed the photos in front of her. The first image plainly showed Mary naked, with her legs spread wide. In the second image, Mary is on her hands and knees. Mary is smiling in the third image as she kneels. The bottom line for me is my future children. And I. Someone superior to that terrible creature is our mother and wife. Goodbye, Mary. I got up and walked away. A few days later, Mary was sentenced to 50 hours of community service for the domestic violence incident. It took another 7 months for me to finalize the divorce. I sold the house and handed Mary a part of the money. I relocated to a different town while keeping my employment. I have no plans to date right now and have focused solely on my profession. Scott also filed for divorce and continues to live in the same location. Steve occasionally calls and asks how things are going. I enjoy his calls. Scott and I meet on occasion. He is in town for business trips. Life hasn't been kind, but it's still better this way. Dear listeners, please leave your opinions in the comment area below. And remember to like, share, and subscribe to Queen Cheating Tales channel.